In 1845, two ships named HMS Erebus and HMS Terror sailed into the Canadian Arctic and vanished. Sir John Franklin led 129 men into the ice searching for the Northwest Passage, and none of them ever came home. For more than 150 years, the Arctic kept its secret, until modern archaeology finally cracked the case wide open. This was supposed to be Britain's crowning Arctic achievement. Franklin was 59 years old, a veteran of 3 previous polar expeditions, and the Royal Navy considered his ships state-of-the-art. Erebus and Terror were reinforced bomb vessels, built to withstand explosive recoil, now retrofitted with iron-plated hulls, steam engines, and retractable propellers. They carried enough tinned food to last 3 years. On paper, nothing could go wrong. The ships were last seen by European whalers in late July 1845, anchored to an iceberg in Baffin Bay, waiting for good conditions to push west. Then they sailed on and disappeared. 2 years passed with no word. Then 3. By 1848, the Admiralty finally admitted something was wrong, and the search began. It would become the largest rescue operation in Arctic history, involving dozens of ships from Britain and the United States. Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, refused to let the search die, funding expedition after expedition out of her own pocket for over a decade. What searchers eventually found was chilling. In 1850, search teams located the expedition's first winter camp on Beattie Island, along with the graves of 3 crewmen who had died early, in the first winter alone. Then, in 1859, a search party led by Francis Leopold McClintock found a written message on King William Island. It was the only official written record ever recovered. The note, left in a cairn, revealed the outline of catastrophe. Franklin had died on June 11, 1847, course never specified. By April 1848, the ships had been trapped in ice for a year and a half, and 24 men were already dead. The 105 survivors abandoned the ships and set out on foot, dragging heavy boats over the ice, trying to reach the Canadian mainland and ultimately help. None of them made it. For over a century, that was essentially all anyone knew. But Inuit oral testimony, largely dismissed by Victorian investigators, told a fuller and darker story. Inuit hunters described encountering starving, desperate white men dragging boats across the ice. They spoke of finding bodies later, and of evidence that the men had resorted to cannibalism in their final days. When explorer John Ray reported these accounts to the Admiralty in 1854, British society was outraged. Charles Dickens himself wrote a public rebuttal, defending the honour of British sailors, refusing to believe Englishmen could stoop to eating their dead. Ray was right. Modern forensic science proved it. Starting in the 1980s and continuing through the 1990s, researchers exhumed the Beattie Island graves and examined skeletal remains recovered from King William Island. The bodies of the men buried at Beattie were remarkably preserved by the permafrost, and the science was damning. Tissue samples showed extraordinarily high levels of lead, likely from poorly solid tinned food cans, possibly compounded by the ship's water distillation systems. Some researchers argue lead poisoning may have caused confusion, weakness, and impaired judgment among the crew during their final desperate march. Bone analysis from King William Island sites told the rest of the story Ray had first reported. Cut marks consistent with defleshing, the kind left by knives removing meat from bone, were found on numerous remains. The Inuit testimony had been accurate all along. Faced with starvation, some of the last survivors had eaten their dead crewmates. But the biggest breakthrough came decades later, and it came from listening to the Inuit rather than doubting them. Inuit oral history had long described the location of a shipwreck south of where searchers had focused for over a century. In 2014, guided in part by these accounts, a Parks Canada-led team finally located HMS Erebus, resting upright in shallow water off the coast of King William Island. 2 years later, in 2016, the Arctic Research Foundation found HMS Terror as well, in a bay that Inuit hunters had, remarkably, named for exactly this kind of discovery generations earlier. Both wrecks were astonishingly intact. Divers have since recovered muskets, ceramic plates still stacked in cupboards, medicine bottles, and even a sailor's leather shoes. A ghostly time capsule of a doomed voyage. The wrecks suggest something unexpected too, that after being abandoned, at least one of the ships may have drifted, and later been deliberately resettled by a small remaining crew, possibly in a final desperate attempt at survival. So what actually killed Franklin's men? Not one thing, many. Ships trapped in punishing multi-year ice, scurvy, starvation, possibly lead poisoning clouding judgment at the worst possible moment, brutal cold with inadequate winter clothing, and a 5-year expedition provisioned for 3. The Franklin expedition began as a symbol of imperial confidence, the idea that discipline, technology, and British will could conquer any wilderness. It ended as a symbol of nature's total indifference to that confidence. For a century and a half, the Arctic held its secrets in ice. It took forensic science and, more importantly, the wisdom of Inuit communities that had been ignored for generations to finally bring the story home. Erebus and Terror are still down there today, protected as a National Historic Site of Canada, jointly managed with the Inuit Heritage Trust, a partnership built, fittingly, on the same knowledge that Victorian Britain once refused to believe.